From the moment we moved into that house in South Florida, a sense of unease settled over me. I was 9 years old, the second eldest of 5 children, and the house seemed like a normal, somewhat dated 1970s structure. But it didn't take long before the unsettling events began to reveal themselves. At first, it was subtle, a creak here, a flickering light there, but within the first week, it became apparent that this place was anything but normal. I was no stranger to ghost stories. My friends and I often exchanged tales of haunted houses and restless spirits, but I never imagined I'd be living in one. It started with my dreams, vivid and disturbing, the same young Hispanic girl ending her life in different ways every single night. The dreams were relentless. One night she hanged herself, the next she drowned in our pool, another night she overdosed on pills. Each method more gruesome than the last. I would wake up in a cold sweat, my heart racing, trying to shake the images from my mind. But I could never forget her face, so young, so full of pain. I tried to convince myself that the dreams were just my imagination, a byproduct of moving into a new house, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something deeper at play. And it wasn't just me. The house itself seemed alive with strange energies. Voices whispered in rooms where no one stood, footsteps echoed down the halls when everyone was asleep, and objects would move on their own. But the scariest moments were those that defied explanation. I had always loved writing, and my desk was my sanctuary, the one place I felt safe in a house full of inexplicable events. One afternoon, shortly after we moved in, I placed a brand new diary on the desk. It was a gift from my mom, and I planned to start journaling that evening. I left the room for no more than 2 minutes, heading to the bathroom, but when I returned, my diary was ruined. Every single page had been violently scratched, as though someone had taken a pen and furiously scrawled across them. Pages had been ripped from the spine, crumpled on the floor, and the lock, which had been securely fastened, was still intact. I stood there, stunned, my breath caught in my throat. How could this have happened? No one else had been in my room, and the thought of one of my younger siblings destroying my journal in the brief time I was gone seemed impossible. The markings were too aggressive, too forceful. I told my mom what happened, but she dismissed it as my younger brothers playing a prank. Yet deep down, I knew it was something else, something darker. Later that week, my younger sister and I witnessed something we couldn't explain. We were in my room, talking, when suddenly a t-shirt lifted itself from my laundry basket, hovered in the air for a moment, and then flew across the room, landing on the floor after brushing against the TV. My sister and I froze, our eyes wide with fear. There was no explanation for what we had just seen. Something unseen had picked up that shirt and thrown it, deliberately. We screamed and ran downstairs, but when we told our parents, they didn't believe us. After all, how do you explain the inexplicable? Still, the activity in my room only grew more intense. I began to hate being there alone, but as the second eldest, I didn't have the luxury of switching rooms with my siblings. The house was always filled with a lingering sense of being watched, especially in my room, which seemed to be the epicenter of the activity. I often heard my name being whispered, soft but unmistakable, and sometimes I'd feel a cold touch on my skin, like someone was trying to get my attention. No one else was ever there. But the most terrifying moment happened when I saw the figure of a child sitting in my closet. It was a small boy, no more than 3 or 4 years old, with dark brown hair and a pale, sickly complexion. His knees were drawn to his chest, and he was rocking back and forth, tears streaming down his gray, lifeless cheeks. The image that still haunts me to this day, though, was the sight of fire trucks on his feet. Whether they were slippers or some bizarre distortion of reality, I'll never know. His lips were blue, and his eyes stared vacantly ahead, as if he didn't even know I was there. I ran from my room, my heart racing, and didn't go back for days. From that moment, my room no longer felt like mine. It was as if I had lost any claim to it, as though something, or someone, had taken it over. The final straw came when I was forced to stay home alone, bedridden with illness. Both my parents were at work, my siblings were at school, and I was alone in the house, trying to rest. I was watching TV in bed when I heard it, footsteps. They moved slowly down the hallway, stopping just outside my bedroom door. I froze. The sound was unmistakable, heavy footfalls on the carpet, yet there was no one there. My door creaked open on its own, and I felt the oppressive weight of something entering the room. I couldn't see it, but I could feel it, the malevolent presence, the sense of being surrounded by pure, cold fear. Then I felt it, something sat on the edge of my bed. I watched in horror as the mattress dipped under the invisible weight. I could see the indentations in the blankets, as though someone had physically sat down. That was the moment I snapped out of my paralysis, threw the blankets off, and bolted from the room. From that day forward, I never slept in my bedroom again. It was no longer a place of comfort, no longer my sanctuary. I began sleeping on the couch in the living room, avoiding my room entirely except when I needed to grab something quickly. The house felt like it was feeding off my fear, and the more I tried to ignore it, the worse it became. The strange and terrifying occurrences in my room were just the beginning. As much as I had hoped that sleeping on the couch would offer some respite, the activity followed me throughout the house. It was as if whatever had claimed my room now roamed freely through the halls, watching, waiting, never allowing me to feel truly safe. It wasn't just me who noticed it. My siblings, who had once teased me for being scared of my own room, began experiencing things, too. My younger sister, in particular, was sensitive to the strange occurrences. One night, while we were sitting together in the living room, we both noticed a dark shadow moving across the hallway. It wasn't a flicker of light or a trick of the eyes. It was a solid, humanoid figure slipping from one limb to another in complete silence. We exchanged a look, our hearts pounding, but neither of us dared to speak. What was there to say? We both saw it. We both knew something was wrong. The more time passed, the more erratic the energy in the house became. Some nights, I would hear faint whispers coming from the dark corners of the living room. At first, they were indistinct, just the low hum of a conversation I couldn't quite make out. But gradually, the whispers became more intense, more insistent. There were times I could almost catch phrases, fragments of words, but they always slipped away before I could fully comprehend what they were saying. It felt as though the house itself was speaking to me, though I didn't understand its language. One of the most unsettling things about the house was how it seemed to play on our emotions. My parents, once happily married, began to fight constantly. It started with small arguments, but quickly escalated into shouting matches that reverberated through the walls. My father's drinking worsened, and with it, his temper. My mother became more withdrawn, distant, as though something heavy had settled over her shoulders. It was as if the house was slowly draining the life from us, feeding our discord. I couldn't help but feel like the house was amplifying our worst traits, dragging us deeper into a dark place. My younger brothers, normally mischievous but harmless, started having violent outbursts for no apparent reason. Even my youngest sister, who was usually so full of light and laughter, became quiet and withdrawn, her eyes often darting nervously around the room as if expecting to see something that wasn't there. And then there were the windows. At night, while I lay on the couch, I began to notice shapes in the windows. It started with just a feeling, that prickling sensation you get when you know someone is watching you. I would look over my shoulder, expecting to see one of my siblings standing in the hallway, but there was never anyone there. Then, one night, as I lay awake with all the lights in the house turned on, my only method of keeping the shadows at bay, I saw it, a figure, humanoid but distorted, standing outside the window. It was tall, unnaturally tall, with long, thin limbs that seemed to stretch up to the sky. Its face was obscured in darkness, but I could feel its eyes locked onto me, staring through the glass. Panic rose in my chest. I wanted to scream, to run, but my body felt heavy, pinned in place by the overwhelming sense of dread. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, watching me, as if waiting for something. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying that it would be gone when I opened them again. And when I finally dared to look, the figure had vanished, leaving nothing but the eerie reflection of the living room lights in the window. I tried to convince myself it was just a trick of the light, that I had imagined the whole thing. But deep down, I knew what I had seen. And worse, I knew it wasn't the first time. My siblings had started mentioning strange figures outside their windows, two dark shapes that appeared just at the edge of their vision, only to disappear when they looked directly at them. The nights were the worst. I started dreading the darkness, the way it seemed to bring the house to life. Every creak, every groan of the floorboards felt like a whisper from the unseen, a reminder that we were never alone. Some nights, I would wake up to the sound of footsteps pacing the hallway outside the living room, slow and deliberate, as though someone was walking back and forth, waiting for me to come out. Other nights, I would hear soft knocks on the walls, starting from one end of the house and slowly working their way closer to me, each tap growing louder and more insistent. It wasn't just auditory either. I began to see movement in the corners of my vision, shadows darting just beyond the reach of the light. Sometimes they were small, like quick flashes of darkness, but other times they were large, looming shapes that seemed to fill the space. There were moments when I could swear I felt a presence standing directly behind me, so close I could almost feel its breath on my neck. But whenever I turned around, nothing was there. The sense of dread was constant, unrelenting. I took to sleeping in the early evening hours, before the sun set, so I wouldn't have to face the terrors of the night alone. When my family was home, the house was still eerie, but somehow more manageable. But when I was alone, when the sun dipped below the horizon and the shadows stretched long and thin across the walls, the house came alive with a sinister energy. What frightened me the most, though, was the growing sense that whatever was in the house wasn't content to stay within its walls. I began to have dreams, vivid, unsettling dreams, where the dark figures followed me to school, to my friends' houses, even to the new places we moved to after my parents' divorce. They were always there, lurking in the background, just out of reach but never far behind. It was as though the house had imprinted something on me, something I couldn't shake no matter how far I ran. The house didn't just haunt my waking hours, it invaded my sleep, my thoughts, my very sense of safety. And no matter what I did, I couldn't escape the feeling that it wanted something from me, something I wasn't willing to give. Years had passed since we left the haunted house behind, and my life had moved on. My family had splintered, my parents were officially divorced, and we had scattered into different homes. For a while, it seemed like the darkness of that place had finally loosened its grip on me. The nightmares weren't as frequent, the shadows no longer followed me in my waking hours, and I could finally breathe without feeling the oppressive weight of something watching me. But the house lingered in the back of my mind, a dark memory I could never fully escape. I wasn't the only one who felt that way. My older sister, who had always been the braver one, decided that we should go back one last time. It was the Halloween after I had just turned 14, and by then, the house had been sitting vacant for nearly a year, having fallen into foreclosure. Our family's belongings still remained there, abandoned in a rush as we fled, taking only what was absolutely necessary. We should have left well enough alone. I knew at the moment she suggested it, but curiosity got the better of me. She and a group of her friends wanted to do a seance in the old house. I didn't believe in that stuff, not really, but a part of me was terrified of what might happen. Yet another part of me was strangely drawn to the idea, like the house still had unfinished business with us, and maybe going back could provide some answers. I agreed to go, convincing myself it was just one night, a single visit, and then we would leave the past behind for good. The group of us, me, my sister, and her friends, loaded into a couple of cars and made the drive to our old neighborhood. The streets were quiet, dark, as we pulled up to the house. No lights were on inside, of course, the electricity had been cut off long ago. The once vibrant lawn was overgrown, and the windows had an eerie, hollow look to them. Even from the outside, the house seemed different, more decrepit than I remembered, like the life had been sucked out of it in our absence. We parked at the curb, grabbed a cooler of alcohol, and made our way inside. I remember the smell immediately hitting me, the stale, musty scent of a place that had been forgotten. My heart raced as we walked through the front door, the floorboards creaking under our feet. Everything looked just as we had left it, but with a layer of dust coating the furniture and the heavy weight of abandonment settling into every corner. We set up the seance in the living room, where I had spent so many nights huddled on the couch, terrified of the shadows lurking just beyond the windows. Candles were placed in a circle, and we sat around them, hands linked, with the cooler of beer at our feet. One of my sister's friends took the lead, speaking in a low voice as she began the ritual. She wasn't a professional by any means, just a teenager who thought she knew what she was doing. We had brought offerings, bread, wine, thinking we could somehow communicate with whatever spirit still lingered in the house. The moment we started, something shifted. The temperature dropped, and the flickering candle flames suddenly stretched higher, as if pulled by an unseen force. I could feel it, the same oppressive energy I had felt for years living in that house. It was back, surrounding us, pressing in on all sides. My breath caught in my throat as I realized we had made a mistake. A terrible, terrible mistake. At first, it was just soft knocks on the walls, like before. Tap, 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 starting from one side of the room and slowly circling us. Then, the knocks grew louder, more insistent, until it sounded like someone, or something, was banging on the walls with their fists. The sound echoed through the house, reverberating off the walls, shaking the very foundation. My heart was pounding, but I couldn't move. None of us could. We sat there, frozen in fear, as the knocks turned into violent thuds, coming from every direction. And then came the voices. First, faint whispers, just like the ones I had heard years ago. But this time, they were louder, more distinct. I could hear full conversations, but I couldn't make out the words. The air was thick with tension, like something was about to break. I glanced over at my sister, her face pale, her eyes wide with fear. None of us had expected this. The climax came when we heard the argument. It was a man and a woman, shouting at each other, their voices coming from down the hallway, my old bedroom. I recognized the sound immediately. It was the same angry energy I had felt growing up in that house, the same dark presence that had filled my dreams and haunted my nights. We were hearing echoes of the past, or maybe something worse, something that had never left. Suddenly, there was a loud crash, the sound of something heavy being thrown across the room. We all jumped, breaking the circle of hands, and the candles flickered out at once, plunging us into darkness. Panic set in as we fumbled for our flashlights, desperately trying to see what had happened. When we finally managed to light up the room, we saw it. A framed photo of me as a child had been ripped from the wall in my old bedroom and thrown across the room. The glass was shattered, pieces scattered across the floor. That was it. We ran. We grabbed our things and bolted for the door, not stopping until we were back in the cars, speeding away from that house for the last time. No one spoke as we drove, the weight of what had just happened hanging heavy in the air. We had disturbed something in that house, something dark, something angry, and I knew we could never go back. Looking back now, I realized that night was a turning point for me. It wasn't just about the house or the spirits that haunted it. It was about the way that place had seeped into our lives, poisoning everything it touched. My family had fallen apart in that house. Our lives had unraveled there, piece by piece, and whatever evil had resided within those walls had fed on that pain, growing stronger, darker, until it consumed us all. Even though we had left the house behind, a part of it stayed with me. I still have nightmares, vivid and terrifying, of that house and the things that lived in it. In my dreams, I see the shadow figures standing in the windows, waiting for me. I hear the whispers, the knocks, the footsteps. I feel the cold breath of something unseen at the back of my neck. But I know one thing for sure, I will never go back to that house. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed. And some places, no matter how far you run, will always find a way to haunt you.